You know, you step outside on a bright spring afternoon, you look at a tree, and you think to yourself, that leaf is green.
Right.
It
Yeah.
feels incredibly simple. Like, it just feels like a solid, undeniable fact, just an objective physical truth of the universe staring right back at you.
Oh, I mean, it is the most natural assumption in the world.
Yeah.
We assume our eyes are simply recording what is already out there. You know,
Right.
the grass is green, the sky is blue. Case closed.
But what if I told you that the green isn't actually in the leaf at all?
Yeah, that's where it gets wild.
Right. What if the green is just, well, a story your brain is rapidly inventing to make sense of the world? Welcome to another custom-tailored deep dive created specifically for you. Today, we're looking at a concept that is going to completely flip how you experience physical reality and, more importantly, how you talk about it.
We are diving into a profoundly fascinating essay by author Xiaoyang Lin. It's titled, Good is Rewarded, Evil is Punished as a Matter of Consensus, and it's dated April 24th, 2026.
And our mission today is to unpack Lin's overarching argument that absolute truths, whether it's the color of the grass beneath your feet or the very definitions of good and evil, are actually illusions.
Exactly. Illusions born from human perception and human language.
Yeah, so we are going to explore how language builds the walls of our reality, how power structures weaponize that language to control populations, and how, surprisingly enough, artificial intelligence might just be the ultimate solution to our deepest human misunderstandings.
It is a massive intellectual journey. I mean,
Right.
to even begin to grasp the philosophical weight of good and evil, we have to start by tearing down the idea that you and I are even looking at the same objective physical reality.
Right, because if we cannot even agree on the physical mechanics of what makes a leaf green, reaching a consensus on abstract moral concepts becomes a whole lot more complicated.
A nightmare, honestly.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's get right into the physics of plants because this is where the illusion begins. Lynn points out that grass isn't inherently green.
It's really not. What is actually happening at a molecular level is that the chlorophyll in the plant's leaves requires energy to perform photosynthesis.
Right.
So to get that energy, the plant absorbs red and blue light from the sun, simply because those specific wavelengths are highly efficient for its energy conversion process.
So the plant acts like a sponge for those specific colors.
Precisely. But what it does not use are the light wavelengths right in the middle of the spectrum, specifically between like 500 and 570 nanometers.
Wait, so it literally rejects that
Which
light,
totally rejects it, reflects it, just bouncing it back out into the environment.
which just so happens to be the exact wavelength our human eyes are built to interpret as the color green.
Isn't that crazy?
It is. When you think about it, we are basically navigating the world through a virtual reality headset. There is no objective color reality out there. Our brains are just taking these rejected electrical signals and rendering them into a visual interface we can understand.
Yeah, the plant is holding on to the red and blue, and we are just looking at the leftover garbage light that the plant didn't want.
Leftover garbage light. I love that. And moving from the human experience to the animal kingdom highlights just how subjective this VR interface really is.
Oh, absolutely. The rendering changes drastically depending on the biological hardware you happen to be running. I mean, if your dog could articulate its reality, it would tell you the grass is a dull beige.
Because they don't have the same receptors, right?
Right. Dogs only possess 2 color receptors in their eyes compared to our 3, so their visual processing center paints a completely different picture.
Meanwhile, a bee is flying around looking at a flower and seeing a vibrant, glowing map of ultraviolet light pointing straight to the nectar.
And that ultraviolet pattern is completely invisible to human eyes.
Completely invisible. And a goldfish swimming in a pond can see approaching infrared light. Like, their reality is entirely alien to us, but it is just as true and functional for them as ours is for us.
Yeah, we spent our whole lives trying to describe our internal VR headset to other people who might be running completely different hardware.
And Lin uses the peacock to deliver the ultimate example of this biological illusion, right?
He does. When you look at a peacock's tail, it is bursting with iridescent blues, glowing greens, and rich golds. It appears to be the most heavily pigmented creature on the planet.
This detail absolutely blew my mind when I read the source material. The feather itself contains absolutely zero pigment for those bright colors.
Zero. None at all.
If you stripped away the illusion, the base color of a peacock feather is just a dull, flat, brownish black.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that the vibrant display we see is a phenomenon physicists call structural color.
Structural color, what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, if you put a peacock feather under a powerful electron microscope, you wouldn't see dyes or pigments. You would see incredibly precise, tiny nanostructures.
Like little microscopic prisms.
Exactly like microscopic prisms and light fans. When ambient light hits them, the physical shape of the feather causes the light waves to interfere with each other. Some wavelengths cancel each other out, while others are amplified and bounce back to your eye.
Meaning the color literally changes depending on the exact angle you view it from.
Right. It acts like a biological hologram.
That is so wild. The color isn't a physical paint applied to the bird. It's a dynamic mathematical relationship between the light source, the feather's microscopic geometry, and, like, exactly where you happen to be standing.
Yep. If you shift your weight to the left, the truth of the color shifts with you.
So if our biological eyes are constantly filtering our physical reality, the essay pushes us into a much deeper layer of perception. Our language acts as the filter for our cognitive reality.
We transition from the limitations of our biology to the limitations of our vocabulary.
And this connects deeply to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, right? The idea that the structure of a language dictates the cognitive boundaries of the speaker's world.
Exactly. And the source material brings up a fascinating Russian color experiment that perfectly illustrates this cognitive boundary. In English, we rely on the word blue.
Right, we might add an adjective and say light blue or dark blue, but fundamentally they belong to the same category in our minds. It's all just blue.
But Russian grammar doesn't allow for that lumping. They have two entirely separate foundational words. There's Goluboy for light blue and sunny for dark blue.
So they treat them as completely distinct colors.
Yeah, the exact same way an English speaker treats red and orange as fundamentally different.
Okay, so in 2007, cognitive scientists at Stanford University wanted to test if this linguistic difference actually changed real-time brain function.
Right. They flashed different blue squares at English speakers and Russian speakers.
And the results showed that because the Russian speakers possessed distinct foundational words for those specific shades, they physically recognized the color difference noticeably faster than the English speakers.
Their brains literally snapped the visual data into pre-existing linguistic folders.
I have to ask, though, does lacking a specific word actually blind you to the reality in front of you?
What do you mean?
I mean, even if I just call everything blue, I can still see that one square is darker than the other if I stare at it, right? Does the language gap prevent perception or just delay it?
That distinction is incredibly important. You aren't literally blind to the shade. However, without the specific vocabulary ready to deploy, your brain is forced to default to lumping information into a generic category.
Ah, so that extra step drops your processing speed.
And your precision. The Stanford researchers actually proved this by adding a cognitive load to the experiment. They forced the Russian speakers to memorize a random string of numbers while looking at the colors.
Oh, wow. So distracting their language center.
Exactly. By occupying their brain's language center with the numbers, the Russian speaker's speed advantage completely vanished. Language isn't just a passive label. It is an active, real-time filter computing your environment.
So the vocabulary we possess literally dictates how fast our brain can compute the world around us. That is staggering.
It really is.
And if missing a color word just slows down our brain, what happens when a language fundamentally alters how you perceive physical space? The essay introduces the Pormpuraaw tribe in Australia, and this pushes the concept into an entirely different dimension.
A literal spatial dimension. The Pormpuraaw native language lacks words for relative directions like left or right.
Wait, none at all?
None. Instead, they exclusively use absolute cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west.
Imagine trying to navigate daily life like that. If they want to tell you there's a bug crawling on you, they can't say, it's on your left leg.
Nope. They have to say, there's an ant on your southwest leg.
Or if you were setting the dinner table, they would tell you to move your cup a little to the north-northwest. That is wild.
Because their language demands absolute spatial accuracy just to form a basic sentence, their brains are forced to constantly run a background process tracking their orientation to the earth.
So their spatial awareness becomes practically superhuman compared to ours.
Yeah, you could take a young child from this tribe, spin them around in a pitch-black, unfamiliar room, and they would instantly be able to point north. They are linguistically tethered to the planet.
And it deeply alters how they perceive the flow of time. The source mentions researchers gave them randomized pictures showing a person aging from a baby to an old man.
Right, and asked them to organize the photos chronologically.
An English speaker will universally line them up left to right because that is the direction our text flows. A Hebrew or Arabic speaker lines them up right to left, but the Pormpura arrange time from east to west.
Because their concept of time does not flow relative to their own bodies. It flows across the landscape itself.
So if a Pormpura person is facing north, they will lay the pictures right to left.
Yes, but if you have them turn around and face south, they will lay the exact same pictures out from left to right.
Their internal operating system is so different from ours. It's like we are running entirely different software on the exact same human hardware.
This brings us to the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, who captured this perfectly. The author shares a famous anecdote where Wittgenstein walked into a packed Cambridge lecture hall in 1932.
Right.
He looked completely disheveled, walked up to the front, and pulled out a broken clock. The clock was stuck, meaning it only told the correct time twice a day. He held it up and asked the room, "Is this a clock?"
And when the audience naturally said yes, he pointed out the trap.
Exactly. If you glance at that broken clock at the exact right moment, you will be misled into thinking it is giving you absolute objective reality. But it is not telling the time. It is only telling its time.
Wittgenstein used this to argue that language isn't a clear glass window we peer through to observe the objective world. Language is the scaffolding of our reality. It is the room we are trapped inside.
We walk around believing we are objectively describing the world, but we are actually just reading aloud the script that our linguistic operating system has provided for us.
So, if biology creates the illusion of our physical reality and language builds the walls of our cognitive framework, we finally arrive at Xiaoyang Lin's central thesis. And this is the core of it all. If our reality is this incredibly subjective, who gets to decide what is good and what is evil?
This is where all these concepts converge. Lin focuses heavily on the ancient conclusion that good is rewarded and evil is punished.
And he actually agrees with that, right?
He does. He argues that this core statement is fundamentally correct. It is a true conclusion. But the massive variable hidden inside that statement is the definition itself.
Right, because good and evil are not universal biological facts like the law of gravity.
Exactly. They rely entirely on language consensus. A community has to sit down, communicate their internal realities, and hash out an agreement on what behaviors support the group and what behaviors harm it.
They have to collaboratively write a shared dictionary of morality.
The profound danger arises in what Lin identifies as forced consensus environments.
And these are societies driven by strict top-down power structures rather than open, horizontal communication.
Yes. In these environments, what is good or evil is defined solely by whoever holds the levers of power. Lin uses the historical idiom of pointing at a deer and calling it a horse.
Oh, I've heard of that. If the ultimate authority points at a deer and says it is a horse, everyone in the society must agree it is a horse.
Exactly. If the authority points at a harmful action and defines it as good, it becomes good, regardless of anyone's internal perception.
Now, while this initially feels like standard political tyranny, Lin makes a brilliant distinction here. He argues it is still fundamentally a language problem.
Yes, that is the crucial point.
Yeah.
The power structure has forcefully hijacked the natural process of language consensus.
So it's power defining the words, not a general language consensus, but the breakdown itself happens within the language system.
Right. True morality, a genuine working agreement on good and evil, absolutely requires free speech. A society needs the freedom to take their inner natural truths, share them openly with others, and naturally arrive at a shared linguistic agreement.
And when power forces the definition, the foundational mechanism of morality is shattered. It isn't a general language consensus anymore. It is just obedience disguised as consensus. So what does this all mean for the people living in it? It makes me think of playing a multiplayer video game where one player secretly holds the admin password.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. They keep pausing the game and changing the rules of physics so they always win. They decide what counts as a foul and what counts as a point, but they look around and insist everyone is playing a completely fair game. The consensus isn't real. It is just dictated by the person holding the keyboard.
That is the nail on the head. Because the rules of right and wrong are constantly shifting to serve the authorities' needs, the citizens trapped in that system can never truly calibrate their own moral compass.
They learn to stop trusting their own eyes and simply look to the leader to define reality for them.
Which leads to a really fascinating and frankly tragic societal side effect that Lin explores. How does a massive power structure keep this forced consensus going without the whole society collapsing under the weight of the cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, how do they maintain it?
They maintain it by aggressively editing the dictionary and treating their citizens like literal children.
Yeah.
Lynn introduces the psychological concept of the giant baby.
The giant baby.
Yeah. In a power-centric society where the authority dictates all definitions, individuals are never given the power of true choice. Consequently, they are never burdened with real responsibility.
The citizens are cultivated into a state of perpetual psychological infancy. They grow adult bodies, they gain adult physical capabilities, but they are consistently denied adult rights and adult autonomy.
And Lynn connects this to the idea of the rebellious phase, a concept we hear constantly in family dynamics that mirror these larger societal power structures.
It is a stunning reframing. Lynn argues that the so-called rebellious phase in teenagers isn't an inevitable biological milestone that everyone must suffer through.
No, it is actually a direct reaction to power inequality.
The teenager is developing adult capabilities, desiring boundaries, and seeking respect. But the rigid command and control structure of the family refuses to grant them that autonomy.
They are treated as subordinates, so they push back. The rebellion isn't happening just for the sake of being difficult. It is a desperate pushback against being treated like a tool rather than a sovereign individual.
If there's no oppressive command structure, there is no need for a rebellion.
Exactly. And the authority, whether it is a strict parent or a tyrannical government, maintains this control over the giant babies by weaponizing vocabulary.
Because if you can control the words people are allowed to use, you control how they are able to perceive their own suffering.
The essay provides a chilling list of invented terminology used by power structures, specifically to hide harsh realities and evade accountability.
Let's read some of these examples from the source, because the level of manipulation is staggering. Instead of simply saying the economy is downgrading, the authorities rebrand it as consumption shifting left.
Or, instead of admitting there is physical violence happening in the streets, they refer to it as a limb conflict.
A limb conflict. That sounds like a joint issue you'd see a doctor for. It entirely strips away the moral weight of someone being assaulted.
It really does. And rather than admitting people are suffering from unemployment, they invent terms like friction unemployment or flexible employment.
It becomes even more dehumanizing. Poor citizens are officially categorized as the waiting-to-be-rich demographic.
And couples who are actively refusing to have more children are coldly labeled as stock couples.
Stock couples, like they're just leftover inventory sitting on a warehouse shelf.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these words are not invented to increase clarity or scientific precision. They are specifically engineered to blur reality.
They dilute public anger and trap people inside an artificial linguistic framework where they cannot even articulate their own oppression.
Exactly. If the dictionary forces you to say you are waiting to be rich instead of allowing you to say you are impoverished, you are linguistically prevented from diagnosing the actual systemic problem. You are trapped inside the authority's operating system.
It is so incredibly insidious. So, if human language is this structurally flawed, if our biology creates visual illusions and our words can be so easily hijacked by power to force a fake consensus, how do we ever fix this?
Right. How does humanity ever achieve a real functioning consensus, what Lynn calls a true contract spirit?
Surprisingly, the essay doesn't look to philosophy for the answer, it looks to technology.
Lynn argues that a civilized society relies entirely on this contract spirit, which requires the clear expression of an agreement and the guaranteed execution of that agreement.
But because humans are so fundamentally terrible at communicating our complex inner realities across different linguistic operating systems, this contract spirit constantly breaks down.
We have all experienced this in our daily lives. Person A tries to explain their feelings but uses the wrong words. Person B completely misinterprets those words through their own filter.
And suddenly there is a massive relationship-ending argument where both people genuinely believe the other person is acting maliciously.
Historically, humanity solved a very similar problem in the world of commerce by inventing third-party payment systems.
Oh, like Alipay or PayPal.
Exactly. Before these platforms existed, doing business with a stranger was a massive risk. These systems stepped in to act as an impartial guarantor.
If you break the commercial deal, the system introduces immediate consequences.
It removes the need for blind trust and forces a culture of execution. You don't have to trust the stranger, you just trust the platform standing in the middle.
That makes perfect sense. They guarantee the contract so the two parties don't have to worry about the mechanics of trust.
Well, Lynn proposes that artificial intelligence is going to evolve into the ultimate third-party payment system for human communication.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting.
AI will stand in the middle of our interactions as the perfectly patient, completely impartial translator. It will analyze the nuances between person A and person B, negotiating the linguistic gaps until a genuine, unforced consensus is reached.
Here is where I really want to push back on this idea. Are we basically concluding that human beings are fundamentally so bad at talking to each other, so hopelessly trapped in our own linguistic VR headsets, that we need computer code to act as our empathy and logic translators?
It sounds a bit dystopian when you put it like that.
Right. Aren't we essentially outsourcing our human morality to an AI?
That is the most critical question this essay raises. But Lin takes an incredibly optimistic stance here. He does not view it as outsourcing morality. He views it as outsourcing the translation of morality.
Outsourcing the translation. Okay, walk me through that.
The AI does not dictate what is good or evil. It simply guarantees that my definition of a concept and your definition of a concept are perfectly aligned before we agree to cooperate.
So it removes the friction of human misunderstanding.
Exactly. Lin believes this perfect, frictionless translation will pave the way for a true global Earth village, because we will finally have a tool capable of instantly bridging our isolated linguistic operating systems.
So instead of suffering under a forced consensus dictated by a tyrant who points at a deer and demands we call it a horse, we gain a facilitated consensus from an AI.
Yes.
It simply ensures we both actually agree on the biological definition of a horse before we try to build a farm together.
Precisely. It strips away the power dynamics and leaves us with the ultimate tool for achieving true, voluntary consensus.
We have covered some massive reality-bending ground today. We started with the physics of a peacock feather containing no actual pigment, proving our physical reality is just a biological rendering.
We explored how the Russian language physically wires the brain to perceive the color blue faster, and how the Pormpura tether their perception of time to the Earth itself.
And most importantly, we unpacked how the concepts of good and evil are not objective facts, but constructs of language consensus.
And when that consensus is hijacked and forced by a power structure, morality breaks down into tyranny, breeding a society of giant babies trapped in a web of manipulated words.
So the next time you find yourself in a heated, frustrating argument with someone, before you get angry, I want you to pause and ask yourself a simple question. Are we actually disagreeing on the facts of the situation, or are we just trapped in two completely different language operating systems?
Are we just two broken clocks arguing about the absolute time?
It is a deeply humbling realization. At the end of the day, we are all just trying our best to describe the invisible electrical signals firing in our own isolated brains.
It really is.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. If artificial intelligence does eventually become this perfect, frictionless translator of our deepest inner thoughts, completely bridging the gap between every human mind to reach total global consensus, will we finally achieve the dream of world peace? Or will we lose some of that messy, beautiful human individuality that only exists because we are slightly misunderstood by one another?